If I could just have your attention real quick.
The turkey bacon melt? You gotta tap your glass.
I don't have one, I'm sorry. Not yet. I'm Steve Filano from 2AWNY.com. Thanks everybody very much for coming out this afternoon. We appreciate your support for Ben. I'm going to say a couple words, pass it off to Jim and some other folks who are here to speak today. But I'll just start off by saying, really sickening the type of thing that happened to Ben Wassell. Marine Corps veteran, served his country and by extension New York State, and then comes home and what happens, he gets made an example of by King Andrew, right? He gets set up for a public beatdown by the progressive mob in service of this gun control mission. And really, what is gun control all about? This is a form of control that is not tethered to any empirical data. We have, no empirical means of really understanding whether or not the forms of gun control that the governor is pushing and that the state is pushing are actually going to result in any meaningful outcome on quote-unquote gun violence. Okay, what this is about is emotional therapy for progressives. That is what gun control is. That is what gun control does. And I don't think you can really understand, what Jim Ostrowski is doing in terms of pushing back on gun control without understanding that first and foremost. Maybe Jim can talk about that a bit when he comes up. But what I want to say before I hand things off to Jim is that I think the future is very bright for Second Amendment civil rights in New York State. Not from a legislative standpoint. Obviously, all levers of state government right now are controlled by far-left autocrats at the Imperial Palace in Albany. But from a court perspective, I think the future is very bright. I think that our culture in Western New York of noncompliance, as evidenced at least in Erie County by Mickey Kearns, who runs the pistol permit office, he said recently upwards of 70% of individuals in Erie County have not complied with firearms registration schemes. We have all 17 district attorneys all across Western New York have gone on record over the past several months and said unequivocally we will not prosecute the 7-round provision of the SAFE Act because it's unconstitutional as upheld by 2 courts. And that opens the door to look at all the other elements of the SAFE Act and the SAFE Act in total, which is unconstitutional. We have, as discussed today in court, the New York State Supreme Court, and just last week in the Second Circuit, which sits above the New York State Supreme Court, the NYSERPA v. NYC case that is set to be reviewed by the court later on this year going into 2020 where it will probably be decided. That's very important because more than likely, as we heard today, that case is going to look at the intermediate scrutiny standard, okay? And if you want to understand why New York State has gotten away for so long with trampling on Second Amendment civil rights, you have to understand that standard, which in summation says, in a nutshell, the government has a compelling interest in public safety, therefore we can burden the Second Amendment by doing X. And X has come to mean a large number of things. It's come to mean the SAFE Act. For a long time, it was the pistol permit system, which Jim is challenging as well in the Second Circuit. And now it's the red flag law. Okay? All those things rely on that intermediate scrutiny argument, which is flimsy, and which I believe there's a very high certainty that when it is reviewed by the Supreme Court of the United States, that will be overturned, a strict scrutiny standard will be installed, and that opens the door to overturn all of these imperial gun control edicts coming out of Albany, because they all rely on that standard. If you look at the briefs filed by the state AG's office, they reference heavily intermediate scrutiny and the long history that has in this state as the means for progressing these gun control schemes. So when you take that argument away, that's the cornerstone of this system, this gun control system, you can overturn the state pistol permit requirement, you can overturn the SAFE Act, you can overturn the red flag law. Anything else really, quite frankly, that comes out of Albany is going to rest on that standard and can be overturned. I mean, we heard in court today, the state representative who argued against Jim, they put in front of him this intermediate scrutiny issue that the court may address, and his best answer was, well, we're going to say that the New York City case applies to New York City only because it's a New York City ordinance. Well, fair enough, but the lens through which you view Second Amendment challenges is still going to apply across the state and beyond if the Supreme Court decides it that way. So that's one issue. The other thing he came back and said is, well, we believe that AR-15s are unusual assault rifles, not in common use, which is false, that are not covered by the Second Amendment. That's very interesting. And I don't think that that's going to pass muster either. You've heard several justices who are on the Supreme Court say in past decisions and supporting opinions that AR-15s are in common use all across New York State and the U.S. as a whole. So I don't think that that's going to stand up as well. And then to sum things up, he also said that, if a strict scrutiny standard is installed, we're simply going to say that intermediate scrutiny is best. So very, very flimsy arguments made by the state today. I don't think that they're going to hold up after the NYSERPA case. So if you take all these things in total, I think the future is very bright for the Second Amendment in New York State. We can't promise you that. These things will be rolled back in the next year or the next 5. But if you look at the makeup of the court and the questionable nature of Judge Ginsburg going forward, and who she may be replaced by, I think that we've got decades to go ahead and roll these things back. So it will happen eventually. You also look at counties and towns and localities all across the state passing non-enforcement resolutions. I know out near my way, Grand Island did that about a month ago. We had Wyoming County do that several weeks before. There are many others who are considering doing it. I'm aware of a county in western New York, I believe it's Onondaga, that's looking at this as well. So, if you look at this from the perspective of non-enforcement, non-compliance, and redress by way of the Supreme Court, I think things look very bright. We need your continued support. Keep looking for updates at 2awny.com. We're going to post all the case audio, the video, all the updates, involving both cases, the one today and Jim's pistol permit case going forward. So I'm going to hand it over to Jim, and I just want to thank everybody again for coming out and showing their support today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Steve's done a great job in recent weeks and months, helping to organize. It's a huge movement. There's a lot of organizations, and they all need to work together. We're like unifiers. I know there's been a little bit of infighting, and that's normal in a movement. But we want all the groups to work together. I know Scope is here today, Gun Owners of America. Any other groups here that Libertarian Party, obviously, which is our Constitutional Coalition. Any other groups? Bill Robinson is here. Bill Verhagen is here. Any other groups that I've left out? Excellent. The bikers are here, and Steve and I, we just want to work in a unified manner to advance the Second Amendment. So, as far as the appeal today, we raised a lot of issues that cast doubt on the fairness and justice of Mr. Wassell's conviction. The court seemed quite interested in several of the issues. You can't predict what's going to happen from oral argument. But I just want to say that I worked about as hard for Ben, although not always quickly, as I have on any case in my entire career, including being up half the night preparing for oral argument after preparing for oral argument all day yesterday. So we're going to wait for the decision of the court. It should come in about 2 months, and we'll keep our fingers crossed, and depending on that decision, we'll go forward and fight for justice for Ben. We also have the pistol permit case going on at the same time, which was argued in the Second Circuit last week, and both the court today and the Second Circuit Court of Appeals are very interested in knowing, that the Supreme Court's reviewing this whole area of what the level of scrutiny is, and Steve covered that very well. So I'm going to continue to work on these 2 cases, and then we're going to continue to develop some new strategy and tactics that we worked on with the various groups, including the Libertarian Party in Batavia, which last spring. And we're going to put out a manual on this. And I just want to say that we've been sort of playing defense in the right to bear arms community. And you know what? If you study war, politics, or sports, you can never win anything playing defense. So we're going to go on the attack. And we're going to say that the governor and his ilk think that the right to bear arms was something that was relevant to colonial times and muskets and whatnot, and only only primitive minds believe in this right. Well, let me tell the governor something. We don't want to become Venezuela, because there's a country that has many similarities to the United States. There's nothing special about us. We're all human beings. It's a Spanish-speaking country. We have a lot of Spanish-speaking Americans. There's many similarities. They're a democracy. Well, I should say they, I guess, used to be a democracy, because this is the point that I've explained to both courts. Yeah, in a democracy, we don't need to be shooting each other in the streets. But you know what? What if they cancel the elections? What if they have a fraudulent election? And what if you go out with your friends and family and neighbors to peacefully protest, and the government troops shoot you dead in the street? Like 163 people have been shot in Venezuela recently. This isn't ancient history. This isn't musket time, colonial tri-cornered hats. There's nothing more important and more current than in a democracy that the people retain the ultimate right of sovereignty as we exercised in the American Revolution. And you can't do that if you're disarmed by a thug dictator. So we're going to go on the offense, and we're going to explain to people that, you know what? The Second Amendment works. The Second Amendment works. We don't have the government shooting us in the streets for free speech, with the possible some tragic exceptions in the 1960s, which shows that even our system, you can have that happen. But it's not a pattern. We don't have a totalitarian police state, although the general trend is in that direction, and the people in this room are leading the way in fighting it. But when I go home to Buffalo, I'm not going to get stopped at a checkpoint and have somebody ask me who I am and what am I doing and where have I been. We don't have homeschooling banned yet. We don't have private schools banned. We're not getting shot in the streets. Guess what? The Second Amendment works. If people understood the point of the Second Amendment, they would get down on their knees and thank God that we have this amendment, because we do not have tyranny yet. We don't have a totalitarian police state. You don't turn on the TV when you're watching Netflix and all of a sudden there's some general on there saying, I have arrested the president. I'm now in control. Well, you know what? You know where that happens? That happens in countries like Yemen, that don't have a lot of private gun ownership. Isn't it interesting? We made this point in our supplemental brief to the Second Circuit. There's a little bit of a connection between political instability and the lack of a well-armed citizenry. So the Second Amendment works. Leaving aside our relationship with the government, it's very effective in protecting us from crime, and most of the time it doesn't even have to be used. I was telling Dave Mangiello before, in my own life, and you know, I've been in a few scrapes, and I've lived in some tough neighborhoods. I've been assaulted or the victim of an attempted assault 6 times in my life. You know how many times the police were there to bail me out? One time I broke up a mugging in New York City and Brooklyn, and on a street with $500,000 brownstones at a minimum. Now they're worth $3 million. And the gentleman said, "Oh, by the way, they had a gun," which probably would have affected my behavior if I'd known that in advance. So, look, as Tom DiLorenzo, the great libertarian economist and historian, and no offense to law enforcement, but very often the police show up just in time to draw a chalk line around your body. So, you know, the bottom line, I'm not going to talk your ear off, although I could. The Second Amendment works. And I want to thank everybody here for understanding that, supporting us. These cases could not be funded, you know, there's no sugar daddy, there's no man behind the curtain. It's just us. It's just us in this room. And without the small donations, which have paid for the Libertarian versus Cuomo lawsuit and paid for the appeal for Ben Wassell, and then future donations will, at this point, we'll announce this, but primarily go to Ben for either a retrial or further appeals. And then when Ben's case is closed off, we'll let people know what the money's going for, because we understand that, you know, we get a donation for $8. Boy, do we understand how hard people have to work in this economy for $8. And that's why we stay up half the night. Dave and Steve and everybody who's helped out, Elise and the Libertarian Party people. Thank you very much. This is it's It's one of the better days of my law practice. Thank you. Yeah, Andrew Hollister, where are you? He's a great guy. He ran with Larry Sharp, but I can also tell you that in another case where the Second Amendment was being violated, he up in Niagara County, he was there. He put his money on the line and helped to raise the defense for that case, and is a tremendous member of the Liberty Movement in New York State with a bright and great future. So step up.
How many of you guys heard what the state attorney general's representative said in the courtroom? Yeah, probably that's still echoing through your ears today, right now, because what he said was, and I'm going to paraphrase it a little bit because it was surrounded by some obscure language. He basically said that semi-automatic rifles are not protected by the Second Amendment in New York State. Boo. That is what he said. Yeah. Yep. Now let me take a step further and let's step away from that statement for a second. There's a lot of people in this state and in this country that believe that to be true. They do. Because if they didn't, we wouldn't be here today. New York State would not be in this situation with the SAFE Act today if other people didn't believe that. So we have a problem here. We have an education problem. One of the reasons that we have this issue is because when laws are created that restrict our rights, many times it's put in such a way that people think it's for safety. And, right, we've heard that. There's a law that was passed, I think it was called the SAFE Act, right? That's why we're here today. You know, I still today meet people who think it has to do with car seat belts. Here we are 6 years later, and people still think that the SAFE Act has to do with car seat belts. That's a problem. There is, but that's not the SAFE Act. Our elected officials who are taking away our right to private property, our constitutional rights, are using marketing and deception to pass this law through. And the general population, whether they agree with it or not, doesn't know what's going on. So I would encourage everybody to look at this a little bit differently. Because I think many times when people attack this issue, we attack it from, it's our constitutional right. And I don't dispute that at all. I agree 100%. It is our constitutional right. But you know what? They don't hear that. They don't understand that. So I would challenge everybody today to instead look at, are you okay with putting good people in jail on the off chance that maybe we catch a bad guy? Are you okay with taking away somebody's individual liberty and throwing them in a cage on the off chance that maybe, perhaps, in the future, at some undisclosed time and location, they may become a bad guy?
Nope.
Are you okay with putting away a father or a mother, like the SAFE Act has done, taking parents away from children in this state on the off chance that somebody might maybe do something in the future? If you disagree with that, it doesn't matter if it's a Second Amendment or not. It doesn't matter if it's a vehicle law or not. What matters is that that's a bad law that needs to go away. That's how we need to talk to people about this issue. Because there are many, many people in this state today, and I'm a huge Second Amendment guy. I probably met 50% of you guys at a gun show, right? Like, or at a firearms event, and I understand it, but they don't, and we're not reaching them. We need to change our language, change what we're doing, and I'll give you a great example. You know, I had people reach out. Some of you guys know I do a radio show. I promoted this event a lot on the radio show. You know what people would ask me? People would ask me, is Ben a good guy? That's the question I would be asked. And this is actually the first time I'm meeting him. So I'm assuming you probably are. But I can't say for sure, you know, but I'm assuming you probably are. But people are asking the wrong questions. Because when you ask, is this person a good guy or a bad guy, at that point you already know the law is wrong, because the law is now set up in a way where people have to question, is this guy going to jail? Is he a good guy or a bad guy? So that's what I want to leave you guys with. Let's change our language. Let's change how we reach out to people. Let's challenge things in a way they can hear it, because they don't hear liberty. They don't hear constitutional. They don't hear the Second Amendment. I was in front of a group of people who call themselves leftists about a month ago. You know what? They're all about the Second Amendment. But you know what else they believe? The Constitution's an old, out-of-date document.
Yeah.
That's what they believe. We got to talk to people in words and language that they hear and they understand. Because us right here in this room, and I'm glad we're all here. I'm not putting anything against it. If we talk amongst ourselves, we're talking in an echo chamber. We're all on the same page. We got to reach everybody else. So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak, and let's keep pushing freedom forward. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Andrew. I think we have one more speaker, and that would be Dwayne Whitmer, who's a local businessman in Buffalo, an accountant, and he is taking on a challenge that is very ambitious, but from what I know about him, he has the ability to deliver on that promise to run a very competitive race for Congress in Erie County and get someone in there who really, unlike both major parties that have obviously let us down, will actually support the Second Amendment on the job in Congress in Washington against a lot of hostility that he will face there. So come on up, Dwayne.
Hi guys, I'm Dwayne Whitmer. I'm an accountant. The SAFE Act was a sham passed in the middle of the night with the pretense of safety. Here's the problem. Didn't make any of us safer. It was so New York politicians can pat themselves on the back, puff their chests out, and say they did something. They were the first state to pass gun control legislation. Like hyenas pouncing on a dead gazelle. That's what they wanted to do. They wanted to be the first. So then 2 years later, they can justify an $80,000 pay increase. Steve mentioned this, and I tried to find facts on the SAFE Act. I'm an accountant. I'm a numbers guy. Since inception, there were something like 9,000 incidents where there was a violation of the SAFE Act, according to the website. 84% of the violations were already a crime before the SAFE Act. How to make anyone safer. Not much other data was able to be found, which is odd. Another fun fact is that New York State made mandatory registration for assault rifles. Makes sense. Didn't do a good job describing what an assault rifle was, and I think that's the point. It was to justify their job and make people afraid. We got to come together. Whether you're red, blue, black, white, it doesn't matter. You got to unify, you got to unite, and you got to make sure you support the people that want to support you. If there's a pro-gun AD or DA, let them know you're on his side. We can do this. I'm not going to talk long because Steve, Andrew, and Jim pretty much had everything I already have to say. As Jim said, the Second Amendment works. A lot of people say, well, times have changed. Well, yeah, you're right. There's a camera in my face. Some of you are recording with phones. Times have changed. If you have a problem with the Second Amendment, you can write on your quill pen on a sheet of paper and have a horse-drawn postal service member bring it to me, and I'll take you serious. Times have changed. The muskets were the ARs during the Revolutionary War.
That's right.
Times change. The Constitution didn't. We have a long way to go. A lot of people aren't on our side, but a lot of people, they're going to come along. We have to talk to them, like Andrew said, properly. A lot of people don't know what guns work. Even the attorney for the state, he didn't know what a military weapon was. He had no idea. He's prosecuting the case. That's what we're dealing with. You got to talk to these people like they don't know anything, because a lot of them don't. But they'll come around. We got to keep the conversation going. We got to keep it up. Thank you for your time, and then back to Jim.
Thanks. I just want to mention the libertarian lawsuit against the pistol permit law has been going on so long. I forgot to thank Ed Garrett, because you were there at the beginning. when I was looking for plaintiffs. And I want to thank you. As far as gun registration, Stephen Halbrook, who's a great Second Amendment lawyer, I'm privileged to know casually, he wrote a book about wartime France. And guess what happened when the Nazis came in and they had the Vichy government cooperating with the Nazis to some extent, and they had a list of who owned a gun.
Yeah.
And they had a sign on the street, turn in your gun in 24 hours or you'll be shot. Except the sign just hung up there for a while, so you can puzzle about what that 24-hour, when that 24-hour period ended and started. Well, some people were shot, but a lot of people, and they went after those people, but some of the people said, I ain't giving up my gun. And they became the French resistance that you hear much about. And of course, there was the Polish resistance on the Eastern Front. And those guns were quite useful in fighting another tyrannical regime. So just an interesting little tidbit. I want to turn it back to Steve for concluding remarks.
Just want to wrap up by saying thank you once again to everybody. I think comment made by Andrew is very prescient. Arguments regarding the Second Amendment, there's an intellectual argument to be made for it. There's a lot of logical arguments to be made for it. And they do have to go beyond, it's my constitutional right. Because as Andrew mentioned, I'll paraphrase this a bit. When you say that to someone, you're basically saying, Santa Claus told me that. The Easter Bunny told me that. That's how a general progressive out there is going to interpret that. Because they just don't have faith in your source when you say that. So here are some logical arguments to make in defense of the Second Amendment. You can respond to King Andrew's comments when he passed the red flag law earlier in the week, when he signed that into law. He cited all these statistics related to incidents associated with firearms, and said, well, these all occurred within the span of the 6-year run of the SAFE Act. Okay, that's a correlative relationship. That is not causative. I could also say in the 6 years that the SAFE Act has been in effect, hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers have fled the state. In the 6 years that the SAFE Act has been in effect, Amazon has decided they don't want to situate themselves here. Is that a correlative relationship or a causative relationship? The fact of the matter is the SAFE Act and other gun control schemes in New York are not based on data. They are based on emotion. There's no data that exists that tells me that burdening this constitutional right that is in the black ink of the Constitution is advanced at all by schemes like the SAFE Act. So there's a great argument right there. I think we have to make more arguments like that. Thank you once again, everybody, for coming. In terms of funding cases, if you want to learn more about the argument against progressivism, which is at the heart of gun control, this is Jim's book. We have it on sale for $15 here today and also on the website. All the proceeds for this go directly to funding his challenges in court against New York State gun control. I know if you've been on the site too, a range of you have actually sold me out of the Imperial Criminal Cuomo stickers. I've reordered those. They're going to be up again. We're also going to be having some stickers come out regarding the non-enforcement zone in Western New York that showcase that very prominently. They're going to go up for sale probably next week. Again, all those funds go towards supporting these challenges. So thank you, everybody, again. This is just the beginning of a long and, I believe, successful effort. So please stick with us, and thank you. Any questions you guys have? Yes. Okay, sure.
Tell us a little bit about the original charges in the case involving Benjamin.
The original charges was that he sold a semi-automatic rifle to an undercover state trooper. Now this was right after the SAFE Act, and it was a publicity stunt by a guy named Schneiderman. And it turned out that he had to resign because he was abusing women.
You mean the former Attorney General?
Yes. And kind of ironic, really, we have the Me Too movement where people are standing up for the rights of women to be free from violence. And one of the things that would help women be free from violence is the right to pack heat, shown to be very effective in protecting women who are properly trained in firearms. So, somewhat ironic that an abuser of women pulled off this whole stunt, and he's now in disgrace, but Ben is left with the after effects of his rather tawdry publicity stunt against an ex-Marine. So that's how it all started, and this is how it's finishing.
Why do you believe the conviction was wrong?
Well, because the statute is a violation of the Second Amendment. These weapons are commonly used and owned by people throughout the United States. And it's interesting that the statute itself says, well, if you're a police officer, you're exempt. Well, let's follow the logic of that. So why do the police need these guns? Because they know that criminals, the bad guys, are not going to follow the law, and they're going to be in street confrontations, and these various features that, city slickers from Manhattan tell us upstate that have no use except for an unlawful purpose. Apparently the police find them extremely useful. Now again, the police are not there 99% of the time you need them, so why wouldn't the same logic apply to the citizenry, that these features such as a pistol grip could be very useful to somebody who's not, a big person who pumps iron occasionally like I do. Maybe you're disabled, maybe you're elderly, maybe you don't have that strength. So what the Manhattan politicians, who are all apparently afraid of their own shadow down there, and everything has to be banned, including soft drinks, and by the way, cars, try to park a car in Manhattan. They don't seem to understand that these features also help law-abiding people defend themselves against hardened criminals when the police are not around, which is almost all the time.
When seconds matter, the police are minutes away.
Exactly. When seconds matter, the police are minutes away.
Jim, there's also something else. Will Count out of Chautauqua.
Yep.
Our county sheriff at the time said he was against the SAFE Act and said nobody was going to get arrested. Ben then got arrested. We interviewed him a second time. He said, well, I don't want my guys to have, a disadvantage. I don't want you guys to outgun my guys. And I'm like, wait a minute. This isn't your right to keep bear arms. This is our right to keep bear arms against, to make sure you don't have a tyrannical government against us. All right? Well, that guy is no longer our sheriff. We got a new guy now.
Right here.
He's for us.
That's good news, but Ben was prosecuted by city slicker politicians from Manhattan who are afraid of.
But
it wasn't the locale. But
right,
I take your point, but it wasn't the. See,
the
we're
sheriff is the chief law enforcement of any county. He could have turned around and said to those people, "Get out of my county." He didn't do it. He embraced it. He could have solved and stopped Ben from that harm, and he didn't do it. And he's no longer in office. We
well.
support Ben.
That's good. That's good to hear.
Couple more questions?
Yes, sure.
What was the goal of today's hearing before the court?
To reverse the conviction and have it dismissed without a trial, but some issues might result in a retrial. But to get the case dismissed.
What's next?
Waiting for the decision in about 2 months.
What's he facing in terms of if the conviction's not overturned?
Well, he's already been sentenced and served probation. The judge realized that he didn't deserve really to be penalized, other than the minimum.
So at this point, it's more about trying to overturn the law.
Clearing his name. It's
Okay.
tough to have a felony in this world. Get you lots of problems in lots of different scenarios. So that's what it's all about.
Especially when he never hurt anybody.
Any other questions?
I'm good.
Thank you very much for coming, everybody.
Thank you.
Sure.